Years ago, I watched a video from Markiplier, a YouTuber I checked in on from time to time whenever I wanted an entertaining horror game let's play. One video caught my interest, and obviously the interest of many others, especially when the title was Warning, Scariest Game in Years. Five Nights at Freddy's became a cultural phenomenon, and who could have foreseen what would grow out of this one indie game? One thing I noticed was that there were several elements that looked familiar in this game. Stuff like fading transitions between scenes would freeze any ongoing animations, etc. And all of this was stuff I was familiar with from ClickTeam Fusion, the game developer software I had been using and playing around with for years. So I started to put the pieces together and got the idea that this amazing game was made with the same software I was using. That's when I started to play around with ClickTeam in new ways, seeing if I could make something similar to Five Nights at Freddy's. And from there, just for fun, I thought I'd turn it into a full game, just for a test, featuring the character in my username, Wario. And the rest is history. I'm one who loves writing stories. How good I am at writing is another question, but I've always loved writing, and so I used this opportunity to make a branching parallel story, you could say, to Five Nights at Freddy's, with elements that were similar in the basics, but took its very own turn as time went on. I naturally started to get certain thoughts along the way, such as how silly it really was to put so much thought into a dark, complex story in a fan game featuring Super Mario characters. But I've picked up a mindset over time, where I think anything in a story can be embraced and given a reason to exist and being the way it is. Is something seemingly stupid, silly, nonsensical? Then give it a reason for being that way. Maybe it can enhance the story in ways you didn't think about before. Not everything even has to make sense, as long as it gives the player an experience and a reaction of something. That is why you can love instrumental music, for example, without having any lyrics or story attached to it whatsoever. And that is also true for Five Nights at Wario's. As silly as the idea of all it sounds, I tried, as time went on, to give it a reason for being exactly the way it is, which actually turned out to be one of the most important factors of this entire story in the end. But in a way that hasn't been directly explained, until now. Here, I intend to explain the entire plot of my Five Nights at Wario's series, a game series consisting of 6 games in total. There's a lot going on in this story, so if you have played through all the games, it'll be easier to follow. There may be certain details I exclude, and if so, the reason for it is because I don't find it important enough to mention, or that the details are already in the game in one form or another, or that I simply want to leave it up for you to find out or interpret on your own. That being said, I want to explain as much as I can, but be warned, once I tell you, I cannot untell you. That is not to say that this is a marvelous, fantastically written story, or even a good story as a whole, but rather that certain things, being kept in the dark is an actual part of the plot, and the experience of the games. Imagination plays a big part in certain stories, and revealing answers narrows down that imagination. So if you want to keep it that way, you can always click away, but if not, grab something good to eat and drink, sit back. And let me tell you about this story I've tried to write over the years, one I've had so much fun with. This will be a very long one, my longest video ever made, in fact. Whether or not the universe of Five Nights at Wario's will continue or not in the future is hard to say at the moment of writing this, but the actual game series of Five Nights at Wario's has come to a fitting end, and so I found it fitting to conclude that with this video. Try to keep up, because at the very end, a lot of things may just click into place for you. Let us begin. This is a world, seemingly realistic, although with people and creatures in all shapes and forms. Many of these characters are ones we know about, Super Mario and all that which accompanies him in his journeys. In this world, however, they are not quite the same as we know them. They are not the goofy, funny stereotypes we've grown to love, but rather flesh and blood people with desires and dreams and lives of their own. This story is not about Mario, however, but his more greedy counterpart, Wario, and how his greed took him and many others down a dark path. The year is 1988. Wario and his friend Waluigi, a loyal yet nitpicky and semi-greedy man, had just opened up Wario's, a small diner/cafe where they sold a special type of hamburger that Wario himself had created. This secret recipe he used gave the burgers a unique, sweet, multi-flavored taste. Wario himself decided to set guard at the first night of the week to make sure his own creation stayed safe. He couldn't take the risk of leaving it alone in the dark. This secret recipe started to attract customers from everywhere, and the rumor of an insanely delicious and cheap hamburger was spreading like wildfire. It's safe to say that the two men made a profit grander than they could ever imagine. Years and years of solid income, and the two proud owners started to plan out the next big step in their business. A factory, one that can mass-produce their unique product, as well as potential new products of the same quality. Enter 2004, 16 years later, and Wario's fast food factory is standing tall and ready, majestic and powerful in sturdy brown bricks. Wario had bought a piece of land that was very central, very big, and yet it had remained unpurchased for as long as he could remember. Strange, he thought. So naturally, this was the perfect spot to build his factory, and it didn't take long until he got the approval to do so. In this world, the people we know as Mario and Luigi exist as normal people as well. Italian men dedicated to hard work. Here, the four people and Mario's current wife, Peach Toadstool, were all close friends, and so, when the factory needed more manpower to keep up with the factory's huge production, the two Mario brothers and Toadstool were all hired with exceptionally good payment. Production was going very well, and sales were skyrocketing. For a while, that was. As time passed, the sales were starting to drop, slowly but surely. The interest in Wario's hamburger that were sold around various stores were fading away, and Wario, being a man who was attracted to the concept of wealth through money, was naturally starting to feel the panic creeping up his back, ready to attack on the day they would no longer make a profit big enough to sustain the factory production. So what did he do? It was something he, nor anyone else, could have foreseen. At the end of a cold day at work, Wario was closing the factory and was about to head home for the day, when he noticed something he had never noticed before. In the dirt, barely sticking out of the ground next to one of the factory walls, was an object that seemed to resemble a book. It naturally caught Wario's attention. Had this been here all the time? Or had someone placed it there recently? Either way, he went over to pick it up. It was stuck in the ground and he had to pull it out with lots of force. Shocked over what he was looking at, he could not stop staring at this old, smelly, worn-down book he was holding in his hands. Strange symbols of horns, teeth and other drawings he couldn't interpret filled the cover. But there was no text on the cover, and so he opened it up and started to skim through it. In here he saw drawings and ancient writings that, surprisingly, still used a similar language as the one they used in the present day. The book could only be interpreted as a witch book or a ritual book, seemingly from centuries ago. Wario was skeptical and felt uneasy how a book like this could end up in his property. That was until he came across what seemed to be a type of wish-granting ritual, accompanied by a drawing. The drawing caught Wario's attention and turned his fear into deep lust. The drawing showed several people dancing around a pile of money, food, gold, diamonds, crystals, weapons. It could all be Wario's. He could have it all in his own hands. All that was required was a sacrifice of the people closest to him. Although it mentioned nothing about what the sacrifice meant in detail. What should he do? Let the factory, his life's work, be destroyed, leaving him and his friends unemployed and ruined? Or could he just say a few words and get whatever riches he wanted? Was it a selfish or selfless action? According to himself, it had to be selfless, right? He couldn't even begin to admit to himself that he may just have done something cruel to the people closest to him, just for wealth. Because he did go through with it. Deep down in the factory's underground corridors, in a small room in the very depths of the cellar, he went through with a ritual. A ritual spell was activated. He could feel it, an uneasy feeling, lingering in the air as he went home. He didn't tell them a thing. But it was okay, wasn't it? It would save the company, it would save their jobs. It would make him richer than ever. And lo and behold, the next day, they got a report that sales had started to skyrocket once again. Mario, Luigi, Waluigi, and Peach Toadstool all questioned what had happened, of course, but all Wario could give them was an shoulder-rising, I don't know look. But no one questioned it any further, because from that day on, things were going better than ever. Only Wario himself knew that something sinister might be behind the sudden increase in profit. But how could he know for sure? How could he know the ritual was real? Or if this was all just a coincidence? He couldn't. So the thought of the book slipped more and more into the back of his mind, taking up less and less space in his head. He felt comfortable that his friends didn't know about the potential reason behind what has happened. But he was wrong. He was not the only one who knew. Wario had hidden the book away in the deep basement of the factory, hoping no one would ever find it. But someone had watched him take the book downstairs. Luigi was observing Wario carrying this mysterious artifact downstairs, the day he activated the ritual. And so, one day, when no one was around to see him, Luigi decided to sneak down into the depths below, through the underground corridors of the factory, to see what he was hiding down there. Here he found the book, and he read through it. Shocked and fearful, he started to get an idea of what might have happened. But due to his good heart and careful nature, he said nothing to anyone, and continued on as if he knew nothing. And he treated Wario just like before, like a friend whom he trusted. And he could not know for sure exactly what Wario had done. In 2007, everything changed, and a massive chain of events were about to unfold. The quiet before the storm was coming to an end, when a man named Bruno Gates broke into the fast food factory one cold evening to steal the secret recipe used in the hamburgers. His motivation for the break-in? All we know at this point is the lust for money through the value of the recipe. He put on a big mascot costume he found in the factory, a costume known as Wario Man, in order to sneak around while staying anonymous. What he didn't know, however, was that Wario himself was present in the factory as well. And before he could locate the recipe, he suddenly found himself face to face with Wario himself in a corridor. Bruno wished to stay safe, but he didn't have the intent of murder. But still, in blind panic and desperation, Bruno Gates plunged a knife into Wario, killing him as his body fell backwards down a staircase, knocking out several teeth from the dying body in the process. Bruno felt a rush of adrenaline like never before. He just took someone's life. He couldn't fully process it, and thus all he could feel was a sense of satisfaction. He felt powerful, unstoppable, and closer to his goal. A door down the corridor opened up, and the sound of the metallic rust screeched down the hallway. As it turned out, all 5 workers were present in the factory, something not foreseen by Mr. Gates, considering the time of day. There was only one thing he could do. One by one, they got slaughtered. There could be no witnesses. He had to remain anonymous and safe. The last one standing was Luigi. But he did not run away, nor did he panic. He was simply in shock over what had happened in front of him, before a sudden wave of acceptance rushed over him. Lost in thought, he walked up to Bruno. Still lost in all of the things he had to take in, he finally looked up into his face, directly into Bruno's eyes, and almost whispered, "I know what he did." Bruno got a brief moment where he snapped out of his delirious rage and looked genuinely confused. Luigi continued with, "Do it," and pointed to a rope hanging above them. Luigi knew. Not in detail, not in the specifics, but he knew Wario did something with that book. And so, he let himself get killed, in the hope that whatever Wario did, it would be broken or cancelled if all of their lives were taken away. And since he was the only one left, with his friends laying dead in front of him on the floor, he accepted his death with open arms, all for the sake of the greater good. Everything was quiet once more. Bruno, standing with the blood-dripping knife in his hand, was trying to process the events that had just unfolded. But he resisted the thoughts storming into his mind. He pushed them aside. He could not deal with this now. For now, he had to find the recipe before it was too late. And there it was, finally. Locked away in Wario's office, a classified envelope was hidden away. While he admired his discovery and was about to head for the exit, something else was going on. Luigi was wrong. His selfless intention did not lead to the result he thought. In fact, the opposite was true. The curse Wario had put upon himself and his friends got activated first now, after their physical bodies turned lifeless. The book, hidden deep within the underground tunnels of Wario's factory, started to move, shake, twist and turn. The pages were being torn apart, flapping and flying across the room like a twister or a tornado was raging inside the room. Then, it all went silent. before what looked like 6 purple puffs of smoke blew out of the book, one being quite larger than the rest. On the main floor, the bodies of the 5 workers were still in the hallway. Their spirits, on the other hand, had not left to an eternal resting place. This was part of the deal, part of the pact, part of the ritual Wario went through with earlier on. The 5 seemingly invisible, glowing purple energy clouds floated in, towards the bodies, towards the lingering, confused spirits of the 5 workers. And as the curse itself attached itself to them, their souls got corrupt, hateful, rageful, and vengeful. They were not gone yet, after all. Not yet. Bruno was walking fast. He wanted to get out and, once outside, get out of this massive costume. But he never got that far. Meeting him in a hallway were the victims of his crime, back alive, standing up. Only something was clearly wrong, off. He froze on the spot, confused and terrified. But that was all he managed to do. He couldn't even think, before the zombie-like corpse of Wario dashed forward and killed Bruno Gates on the spot, leaving him dead on the floor, trapped inside his costume. Hell had been unleashed. A curse which was only the beginning had taken root in the spirits of the 5 factory workers. They did not hesitate. They turned around and walked out. The parasite that was attached to them kept them from feeling anything. Not any satisfaction, not any human emotion, not anything. All they felt was a lust for revenge. The curse had an effect of numbing everything else and embracing chaos instead. What was this spell? Where did this energy, this curse come from? And does it have a reason for being here, for existing in the first place? All we know is that Wario's lifelong dream had become a nightmare for many others than himself, trapped in his dead body, while his inmost core was transformed into a monster. As these terrible events were unfolding in the factory, nobody around was actually aware of them. But someone was paying close attention, observing that not everything was as it should be. A man in his 40s named Christopher Peterson was a quiet, observant man and a brilliant scientist. He was high up in the food chain, so to speak, in the world of science, and currently worked for a very secretive company, and only the fewest of the few knew the company even existed. Christopher was studying the big questions, the fundamental questions of reality. Time, space, the human body, nuclear physics, as well as very secretive research. But his favorite topic and his area of expertise was time. For long he had slowly but surely been experimenting with the idea of time travel and how time is structured. Few people had progressed this far in this field, except for Christopher Peterson. His wife was another persona we know from before, but similar to the others we know, this alternate world only shares some similarities with their origin. Rosalina, normally known in video games as a cosmic queen of sorts, is here merely a person, a normal woman, as far as we know, that is. She could feel Christopher starting to feel uneasy. She knew that he knew that something terrible had happened. Then he saw them. The dead, yet the walking, out in the dark corners of the street. He observed Wario and the others, as shivers went down his spine, as if his body was telling him that this was something nobody had seen before and nobody should approach. And so, Christopher's workflow picked up speed. He had to prepare. What he had seen, he knew there was a great evil behind it. He could sense it the day he saw them. And thus, he rushed to complete an experiment that so far had only been a theory in his mind. A time machine. A machine to move matter and perhaps even non-physical energies through time. Even though his dedicated research had reached a lot further than anyone else's, his knowledge was still not absolute of the structure of time. He told his wife about what he saw, and he told her about his plan. If there was any good time to test his time machine, it was now. He gave Rosalina the instructions needed, hugged her goodbye, and entered his own creation, promising that they one day would meet again. He pressed the button, and within 5 seconds, Christopher was sent far, far away, to another age centuries away from our own. Rosalina was left there, alone, but with the strong courage to stay dedicated, remembering what she had to do, remembering what Christopher had told her. And so she started her search for the 5 possessed bodies wandering around the streets outside. Eventually she found them, met them face to face. They stared each other down, but not for long. The frozen moment that felt like an eternity was broken in a few seconds, as the corpse of Wario moved towards her in aggressive manners. Rosalina reacted immediately, pulling out the device Christopher had left for her. This device was a form of powerful electrical rod. The 5 cursed ones stopped, as if they had hit an invisible wall, and slowly but surely, their bodies collapsed onto the floor, leaving nothing but bright purple energies floating above them, which slowly got absorbed towards the tip of Rosalina's rod. A flash of white lit up the entire back alley, and everything was quiet. The air whistled a gentle breeze. Rosalina was on the ground, knocked back by the immense energy as she was breathing out in relief and anxiety. The bodies were laying lifeless in front of her. If everything went according to her plan, the cursed spirits were sent through time itself, backwards, to before whatever cursed them managed to get hold of them. In a state of hurry and panic, this is all Christopher and Rosalina could think of and plan out. But did it work? Were they all saved? Were the events reversed and undone? The results were not quite as planned. Something had gone horribly wrong. Somehow, Rosalina felt weaker. She felt strange. She did not know if this was due to the immense energy blast that had knocked her over, or if something else was happening. Somehow she felt drained, limited, almost cut in half. Christopher had miscalculated, misjudged, and misunderstood. He missed the mark. He did not realize that time is fragile. The mysterious rod Rosalina used was crafted in a hurry by Christopher. It was not as stable as he had hoped, and it consumed far more energy to send the cursed spirits back in time. In fact, the energy blast was so strong, time itself cracked in two. It cracked like a mirror, splitting into multiple pieces, where it will show the same grand image, but certain parts look different. Time split in two. Like a rock cutting a river in two, it formed two branching paths. But in the end, they will naturally form back together, combining back into one. The soul of every living person was split in two, living in two different alternate realities next to each other, that one day would combine back together as the timelines eventually would start merging in a distant future. The timeline of this world had been ripped apart and split in two. Keeping this in mind is very important going forward with our story. To understand what it means when the first and second timeline is mentioned. The first timeline was the one where everything up until now had happened, and the second timeline is the one that was now created. The world was still one composite whole, only split in the middle for a while. This means Rosalina's and Christopher's plan was to send their spirits back to 1988, the year of Wario's cafe. And it kind of happened, but not in the way she foresaw it. This second and new timeline had now been created. And this new parallel flow of time is where the spirits of the future ended up. They were floating there, hovering around, without being attached to any physical bodies. And as neither Christopher nor Rosalina foresaw, the curse was still attached to these lost souls. In this new timeline, the spirits of Wario and the others were now, in other words, living in two different places at once. Half of them in their respectful bodies, while the other half came from the first timeline and were now floating around, cursed in this newly established Wario's cafe. It was once again the first week of the cafe's life. Wario was once again sitting night guard during the first nights of the week. And something was off this time. He thought he could see shadowy figures from time to time on the camera monitor. But whenever he went to check, nobody was there. He thought he was imagining things, until he got a call next day from a person known as Winslow.
Wario, my good man! Do you hear me clearly? I sure hope so, man. You weren't at work today, so I just had to call you to tell you this, cause something crazy went down today. So, I had lunch break, relaxing and goofing around with the camera system, you know, and I saw you! You, with wide glowing eyes and a deformed face. You were just standing there by the back door, so I naturally went to check if it was you, but no! You were nowhere to be seen when I got there. No one else there believed me, but that looked like a freaking demon to me, man!
Despite what Winslow reported, Wario stayed. And lo and behold, he saw himself, as well as his friends, roaming the hallways on the camera monitor. These strange apparitions interfered with the camera systems, the electronics, everything. Wario had no idea what was happening, and few people believed his stories, except for Winslow and Waluigi. It didn't take long until the paranormal hauntings got so strong they had no other choice but close the cafe down for good. A fast food factory was once again Wario's grand dream, but with events that had unfolded recently, their budget was not even close to fulfilling that dream. Still haunted by what he had seen, Wario made the decision to pursue another of his fields of expertise: video game production. A much cheaper business to run, and one they could start with immediately. So they managed to buy an old building from an unknown company, which was sold to them by one of the previous owners of the building and one of the people of this unknown company, a man named Lucas. And so they officially started the company WarioWare Incorporated in 1990, with the slogan, "The #1 place in microgames production." And surely it went very well, and the company was a success. They even needed more manpower eventually and hired Toad as an assistant. Everything seemed to run smoothly. The corrupt spirits, however, were staying behind, keeping a distance. Why could that be? As it turns out, Wario himself, as well as the other workers, had a strange feeling while working there. A feeling that could not be explained. Wario considered the idea that it may have been the strange paranormal activities from the cafe that had followed them. But there was no sighting of them anywhere, and this feeling was different. Vague. They all soon claimed the building was haunted, a rumor that spread across the city. WarioWare Incorporated is haunted, or has strange auras coming from it. That's what the word said. Yet it wasn't anything that troubled them to great extents, and they were able to continue their work. It took about a year of good work before another eerie breeze flew across WarioWare Incorporated. And Toad was the one who felt it the most. This feeling was not of anything paranormal per se, however, but rather a real threat. He started to report seeing what he described as a monster roaming around outside, spotted by multiple witnesses in the area. This monster, described as a dragon-dinosaur hybrid, was given the name Bowser. At times, Toad was even hiding in a cabinet back in the tool storage of the building, fearing the monster's genuine threat. This is something he wrote about in his diary, especially around early 1991, and his fears would later become a reality. In 1993, Bowser, the rumored creature roaming the nearby area, entered WarioWare Incorporated and burned it to the ground. Apparently, this Bowser creature had capabilities of breathing fire from his mouth. The only one at work at the time was Toad, hiding in the tool storage cabinet. He had no way out. The building was burning around him, and he ended up dying, alone and afraid. The creature known as Bowser didn't make it out alive either, as the building started to crumble and fall apart, and he got crushed and stabbed by debris, wood and rock. The news of the fire spread fast, and Wario and Waluigi couldn't do anything but accept the horrific fate. The fire department found the body of Bowser, and speculation started to spread as to what this creature was. Was it natural? Or an artificial creature? And why did it come here to burn it down? This building specifically. It was buried under the old burned-down office. Toad's body, on the other hand, was never found. At this point, Wario and Waluigi had earned a massive profit, despite only running the production for a few years, and they once again had enough to get a loan and build the massive fast food factory, once again in 2004. From here, history repeats itself in most ways, just like the first timeline, where everything began. However, small changes were still occurring, and the ancient book containing the curse was found by Wario. But because their profit was still going well, he brought it down to the cellar, but didn't use it. Otherwise, they hired the three friends as workers like last time, business was going well, everything was seemingly perfect once more. That was until, just like last time, Bruno Gates decided to commit the crime of his life and try to steal the recipe. And just like last time, all 5 workers ended up dead by Bruno's hand. The only real difference was Luigi, who did not willingly accept his death this time, as he had no knowledge of any evil to stop. These half-souls, their bodies contained, left their respectful bodies and ascended somewhere. To a paradise, something of a peaceful place, it is unknown. Exactly where, we do not know. This is, however, the point where the possessed halves of the spirits, that had been following them for years, stepped in, and once again took over the bodies of the dead, killing Bruno shortly after. This is where history changes up from what originally happened before the time split. The cursed bodies of Wario and the rest stayed within the factory walls, and furthermore, no one who investigated the factory found these bodies. The fact that Wario and his friends were never found, and no one truly knew what happened, obviously meant the factory closed down, seemingly for good. Some even claimed the factory was cursed. The Warriors brand was once again quiet, gone like a memory. The factory closed, Wario and his friends gone like the wind. The remains of WarioWare Incorporated was also a ghost of the past. Until Christopher Peterson, the scientist working on the secret research programs, bought the building to use it and its old components for his own research. This did obviously not occur in the first timeline, as WarioWare never existed there, and Christopher was never allowed to purchase the building from the old owners in that timeline. But here, seeing as Wario was the owner and he was now declared dead, Christopher could buy it from the city itself. Despite events in this timeline being slightly different, Christopher was still focused on the topic of time, something he continued to research while in the old ruins of WarioWare Incorporated. But as time passed, he swore he could briefly hear his own voice echoing through the walls. Due to his knowledge of time, Christopher started to suspect that time had already been tampered with and split. That this timeline wasn't the only one existing, and that another Christopher existed somewhere. Was another part of him trying to make contact with him? Warn him about something? He couldn't know for sure, but the voice kept appearing now and then, distant and quiet. And it didn't take long before the sound of his own voice wasn't the biggest mystery anymore. An apparition, a face hidden in the darkness, could sometimes be seen in the corner of his eyes. Christopher was not sure if he was imagining things or if someone or something was watching him. Whatever he saw seemed to slip in and out of reality. He had a bad, eerie feeling. Something was not right about it. This feeling of his continued for days, until the silhouette could be seen clear as day. It was the body of a man, yet not quite. Something was off. Multiple limbs? Distorted? Maybe. Before he could even look at it more clearly, before he could even react, Christopher was gone. Vanished into thin air. the silence of the empty WarioWare Incorporated was back once again, and Christopher was nowhere to be seen. Weeks turned into months, which again turned into years. Christopher Peterson never returned. The fast food factory remained stationary, lost in time, almost like a magnet pushing everyone away from it. No one wanted to go inside. But during the years, people passing by swore they could see faces of the 5 missing people in the windows, staring out at them. Some of them smiling, others with a blank expression. Was it true? Or did people just imagine things? These rumors, and the strange aura emitting from the factory, caught the interest of one specific man. In the woods, away from the busy traffic and the loud noises from the city, was the house of Lucas McRoy, an old man and brilliant scientist. His wife was long gone, and his son, Richard, had long moved out. Lucas McRoy was old and sick, yet he was determined, strict, harsh, and smart. Perhaps more smart than he was wise. He was actually working for the same secret company as Christopher Peterson. However, Lucas was higher up in the system, one of the top scientists of the company, one of the top leaders of the research programs, and thus, when he heard about the strange happenings at the closed-off Wario's fast food factory, it naturally caught his attention. While he was not allowed inside, he was able to detect strange magnetic and electrical forces around the land where the factory was built. He was fascinated, confused. And in 2014, 7 years after the factory closed off, Lucas got a brilliant plan when he heard the government was planning to reopen the mysterious factory. He had to know more about this place and what caused the electrical and magnetic forces there and what secrets could exist in there. And so, he convinced his son, Richard, to apply for the job as a night guard, with a secret intention of using his own son as a method of obtaining data and information about the place. Richard agreed, without knowing about his father's intentions, and Richard got the job. And the very next week, Richard McRoy began his new job as a night guard at the newly reopened Wario's fast food factory. The week began. Richard arrived on time at 12 AM, where he got a phone call from a co-worker known only as James.
Hello? Hello? Are you there?
James explained the work situation, what Richard's task was for the night, and that the factory had a dark past. Richard was confident that this was going to go well. That was until he started to see someone on the monitor for the security cameras around the factory. Deep in the darkness, he could make out what looked to be a short man looking back at him. At first, Richard didn't think much of it, seeing as the cameras were low resolution and black and white. But things only got worse from there. The apparition on the cameras seemed to move closer and closer to Richard's office, and he could finally get a good look at the being outside his door. It was Wario, dead, yet alive. The situation started to snowball from there as more of the missing people who had been gone for 7 years reappeared in front of Richard's eyes, and they came closer and closer. What exactly were they after? Revenge, of course, on Bruno Gate, as their spirits were corrupted by the old curse put upon them. They were blind to anything else but revenge and hatred. They were out to kill Richard McRoy, and he quickly caught on to this realization. Using the mechanical doors and lights in his office, he managed to block out the 5 people as they tried to breach his office. But he was shaken, terrified, as he could not believe what was happening and what he was experiencing. He made it through the first night and immediately wanted to tell his employer about the situation, until he remembered his financial situation and how insanely well they were paying Richard for his job. He decided to keep his mouth shut, at least for a while, and continued throughout the week, where James would give him call each night for briefing, but getting more and more insecure and suspicious with each phone call. Richard McRoy remained unharmed for the following nights, seeing the corpses of the dead employees hunting him down. However, in addition to them, Richard swore he could see another different entity. A face floating in the hallway. Black eyes, purple-like skin, and before he knew it, it was gone, like a hallucination. On the 5th night, James called once again, for the last time, confused as to why Richard was still there. He told Richard the factory had closed off only after 4 nights, and Richard had not been informed about this. As it turned out, his father, Lucas, was one of the main investors in the fast food factory. Potentially, Lucas could have been the one withholding this information from Richard in order to keep his son there to gather more data for his own research. Perhaps Lucas was onto something so big that he was willing to use his own son as bait. As James and Richard were on the phone, James decided to come over and try to open the factory doors to let Richard out. But as he got closer and closer to the factory and finally arrived, an electrical buzz could be heard through the phone. James was gone. James was vanished. Did Wario kill him? Or what happened to him? As Richard did everything in his power to survive the 5th night, the clock hit 6 AM, and the automatic lock on the doors unlocked, and he escaped, and he ran back home. The 5 dead ones remained inside the factory walls for a while, wandering around with no sense of time. Wario's fast food factory closed off, and this time for good. But there was one more soul inside that still had not left. The spirit of Bruno Gate had not been able to let go, and had thus returned to his dead corpse inside the mascot costume he died in. And slowly but surely, his consciousness returned and became clear. He knew what he had to do. It did not take many weeks before Lucas McRoy passed away, something everyone around him, including his son Richard, had foreseen. Richard was now alone, or so he thought. As time passed, increasingly terrifying nightmares would become a common occurrence. Dreams of events back in the factory, dead faces jumping on him to tear his eyes out, as well as a surreal common dream of watching a television screen. In these dreams, Wario and the rest from the factory would appear in empty, strange TV channels, including a channel named Cooking with Emma, amongst others. These specific nightmares felt a bit too real, yet surreal at the same time. Each dream began with a news report that got increasingly dramatic, where it eventually ended with the announcement of world catastrophe and TV viruses coming out of people's televisions. These dreams seemed to be affecting Richard's mood and behavior in his everyday life. Were these traumatic nightmares alone, or were there more to them? Throughout a week straight, the nightmares were at their worst and strongest, where Richard would dream of a tall, twisted version of Wario that felt more threatening, more menacing than the rest. What this meant, or if it had any meaning at all, was unclear to Richard at the time. As it turned out, back in the abandoned factory, everybody had left. Except for two. The lost and confused soul of Bruno Gate still roamed the factory halls. And the dead body of Luigi was laying on the floor, without moving an inch. His corrupted spirit had left the body, and was now somewhere else. Three years passed since the reopening and closing of Wario's fast food factory. The dead still roamed around in secret looking for the one, as they called him. As the curse kept possessing them, it also grew stronger over time, and as it grew stronger, it was now able to transfer over to others and possess more people, adding to the corrupted army. Wario dug up and found the corpses of Toad and Bowser back at the old WarioWare Incorporated, and brought their dead bodies back to life, acting as soulless killing machines. He went on further to corrupt two more living beings, a girl named Ashley, as well as Yoshi. Those two stayed behind, but he kept them secure and under his control for later use. It was at this time in 2016, late 2016, that WarioWare Incorporated was reopened from the ashes. A certain person had bought the old company and had started to renovate it, bringing it back to life once more. As they were preparing for a reopening, the builders found two diary pages from Christopher Peterson. But aside of the rumors of a missing person named Christopher Peterson, they didn't think much of them, and so they left the diary pages where they found them. Renovation of WarioWare Incorporated was going well, and Wario, the previous owner of the building, and the original owner of WarioWare Incorporated, was watching closely. His spirit, as well as his body, was flowing with this strange energy or curse from the witch book, and as seen previously, it had the power to raise the dead. Wario had seen this all as an opportunity. Cursing an actual soul requires a lot of energy, and that is also why he found the dead bodies of Bowser and Toad and brought those back to life. The day had come for the grand reopening, and once more, a night guard was needed until proper security equipment could be installed. This job went to Thomas Taylor, a quiet Irish man eager to work during the quiet nights. Thomas didn't have any close relatives or friends, and so working during the night was perfect for him. As he sat down during midnight, the new owner of WarioWare Incorporated called him to inform him on the task of the night. And this new owner was none other than Richard McRoy.
splendid. That means you're ready to take on your new job. Yeah. Anyway, this is WarioWare Incorporated, the #1 place for micro games production.
Richard sounded confident, strong, and almost like he was having fun, and mentioned to Thomas that the place was rumored to be haunted, referring to the old rumors when Wario and Waluigi was running the place back in the 90s. He also informed Thomas that Richard himself had experienced hauntings before, referring to his night shifts from back in the factory. The night shift began, and it did not take long until Thomas began noticing movement on the security cameras. It was Wario and the rest, who had of course been following the process of the reopening of his old studio. Anyone they could torment, torture, and eventually kill, they would. It was always fueled by the extreme emotions the Kurd brought out in their hearts. And a night guard was, just like in the factory, the perfect target. All of this contributed to the curse growing stronger. Although Thomas was older and wiser than Richard was, he too decided to stay multiple nights for the good payment, although he tried to report his experiences, but was only met with laughter and strange looks. Richard was the only one who believed something strange was happening, even though Richard himself was acting strangely. He was surprisingly calm. As the week progressed, the rumored dragon Bowser and the old missing employee Toad appeared, hunting Thomas down alongside the rest of the dead crew. Thomas was a brave man, a curious man, and was able to stand his ground without too much trouble. And yet, Richard McRoy was sounding more and more insane each night on the phone. On the 6th and apparently final night of the week, Thomas started to hear a demonic tone in Richard's voice.
Now it's your turn to have some fun, eh? Ready, set, go!
As it turned out, the corrupt spirit of Luigi was possessing Richard, where he was used to lure people into the role of another security guard. At this point, Richard was fully possessed by Luigi, and the real Richard was now hidden somewhere deep, deep within. At this point, Thomas felt it was time to leave for good, making this his final shift. But as he went to rush to the exit doors, they were all shut tight, alongside the windows, making them impossible to open. He could not get out. All he could do was to hide in the office until somebody could come and save him, as his phone signal somehow wasn't working properly to make calls for help. The next night arrived, the 7th night, with Thomas still stuck inside, and he got yet another phone call from Richard McRoy. As Thomas was standing up from his chair, something strange occurred. Richard's voice on the phone was abruptly cut off, and the sound of electric static took its place, followed by dark, backwards talking.
So you better give them a warm welcome.
At the same moment, Thomas felt a weird, strange vibration in the entire room. Something was happening. The walls, the furniture, everything seemed to warp and twist for a brief moment, before everything seemed to stop once again, and the night continued as it had for the last week. Hiding in a back room, Thomas could hear the scream of a man, possibly Richard McRoy, who had apparently entered the building earlier the same night. The hours passed by, and Thomas managed to survive the final night and finally managed to escape the building. Here he was met by the police and a witness named Matt Parker, who had called the police after hearing Richard's scream from within WarioWare Incorporated. Just a few minutes ago, Richard had apparently came running out of the building and was now on the run from the police. Thomas tried to explain what had happened, that he had been locked inside the building for the last 24 hours with entities as well as Richard McRoy hunting him down. Thomas slowly calmed down, realizing it was all over and he was okay. That was until he saw the newspaper article the next day about the incident he was involved in. Thomas began his job in October of 2016, and yet the newspaper article had the date May 8th, 2017. For some strange reason, 7 months had slipped by during his 1 week of night shifts. Thomas was speechless. He remembered the strange vibrations during the final night and came to the conclusion that this had to be connected to the unbelievable time slip that he now was experiencing. Was it connected to the beings he encountered? Or was something else hidden within WarioWare? He had to get deeper into what this was all about. During the next night, he made his way over to the old Wario's fast food factory. Richard told him he had worked there, and so he simply had to figure out more about what was going on. There were simply too many questions in the air for a curious man like Thomas Taylor. So he broke into the abandoned factory and made his way down to the deep tunnels in a cellar. They kept going deeper and deeper, with keep out signs hanging in numbers. As he arrived at the very deepest room, he felt a strange pressure in his head. The room was small, with an old smelly book laying on the table. He noticed his watch was going crazy and his compass was spinning in all directions, and none of his electronic equipment were working properly. It was as if he had hit some special magnetic field. Thomas was curious, slightly frightened and mostly intrigued. To check that it wasn't just his own equipment malfunctioning, he went upstairs and brought down lots of electrical equipment. And as soon as he tried to turn it all on at once, it happened. A bright purple flash filled the entire small cellar for a brief moment before everything turned dark and silent once more. And Thomas Taylor was gone. After the events in the mysterious WarioWare Incorporated, the Cursed Ones continued the search for revenge. Up until this point, several people had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Christopher Peterson disappearing suddenly in the old WarioWare Incorporated back in the 90s. James vanishing into thin air as he tried to help Richard McRoy in the factory in 2014. And now Thomas Taylor disappearing in the depths of Wario's old factory. What happened to them all? Where did they all go? Perhaps later in our story, we will get an answer to all of it. As Wario was walking with his undead army, the cursed corpse of the Bowser creature blasted fire from his mouth in an uncontrollable state, burning Wario's skin on his face right down to the bone, due to Bowser not being alive anymore, and thus his body functioned as a machine for the curse to control. And since the attention and focus got deviated for a bit, Bowser's fiery functions got unleashed. He removed the curse from Bowser, and the body returned to its lifeless state. Before their travel continued on from WarioWare Incorporated, the spirit of Luigi left Richard McRoy's body, and instead, the spirit of Peach took its place, leaving her body behind in the now closed-off WarioWare Incorporated, and Luigi caught up with them after rising once more back in the factory where his body was located. They were going to continue to use Richard McRoy to further hunt down people in a never-ending spiral of revenge. It was now late 2017. Through manipulation and lies, the cursed ones managed to trick a young man known as Edward Coleman into a false job. Although they could simply kill him right away, the curse inside would grow stronger the more they tormented souls first. Wario claimed to be from a company known as Secure Incorporated and told poor Edward that he had gotten a job to secure a big house while the family living there was on vacation. Edward Coleman, being young and naive, applied immediately and traveled to the house in question the very same night. This house was the one and only McRoy family house. As Richard was now the official owner after his father's passing, the house was empty and acted as a perfect place to bring victims to. Edward arrived, and immediately he got a phone call from Secure Incorporated. The man calling him was in fact Christopher Peterson's cousin, Max Peterson.
Hello? Oh, thank God. You're in the house, right? Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Max. I'm one of the employees at your new job, but that's not important right now. What is important is for you to get out of there.
Max was terrified, as he called, and explained to Edward Coleman that no real employer had contacted Edward, and that this house was not in need of any security. It was all a prank, a trap. And as we know, this trap was set up by Wario and his allies. Max explained further that no one had lived there for years, ever since Lucas McRoy died, and that Edward needed to get out. The house already had security cameras put out, from when Secure Incorporated had secured the house years before. Surprisingly, getting out was not possible for Edward. Doors were sealed and windows boarded up, and hallways that led to exits were leading seemingly nowhere. It was the curse creating hallucinations and illusions and trapping Edward inside. Max said that sending someone over could make things worse. So Edward was on his own, with the assistance of Max on the phone. And lo and behold, Wario and the rest, now including Yoshi and Ashley, were there to hunt him down, to eventually kill him. Even after surviving a night, Edward was not able to leave and had to sneak around for food and water before a new night approached. 4 nights in a row, Edward was hiding in various rooms around the house, using whatever means he had to defend himself against the threats that were tormenting him, while Max Peterson checked in on him every night through phone calls. Some phone calls were interrupted by Richard McRoy. Of course, since Richard was possessed, he was part of this plan.
Hello. This is a friend. How are you tonight?
On the 5th night, however, something unexpected happened. As yet another sun was setting and midnight was approaching, purple light, as from a strong colored spotlight, filled the room for a brief second. And Edward suddenly and shockingly found himself in a room that did not belong to the McRoy house. It was an old, pitch-black cellar. Edward had no idea what was happening. The room was cold and smelled rusty and left behind by time itself. Max called once again and was surprised to hear Edward's location. Max could confirm that the McRoy house had no cellar. Where exactly did Edward end up? Why was he seemingly teleported to this place? Before Max could say much more, Richard McRoy stormed into his office and stabbed Max Peterson right in the back. Max died in his office chair. Richard, fully possessed by the spirit of Peach, picked up the phone and talked to Edward for a short moment, saying he was coming over very soon, before hanging up. The spirits were always on the hunt for the one, and every time a soul was tormented or killed, the curse grew stronger. Edward, using the night vision camera on his pad, managed to survive for many hours during the night, until finally Richard McCroy himself came down there. Without hesitation, Richard killed Edward in cold blood. Silence. A pause, before the possessed Richard McCroy brushed it off as, "So it wasn't you either." All of them, Richard, Wario and the rest, walked through the deep cellar and walked back upstairs, and exited Wario's fast food factory. This cellar was none other than the old cellar of Wario's fast food factory. During the many years of possession, the curse had grown strong enough to be able to transport matter through space, and now they transported Edward Coleman and the rest from the McCroy house into one of the many corridors of the deep cellar in Wario's factory. But why? Why teleport Edward and themselves away? And why to Wario's factory of all places? They continued their search for the next victim. But this is where the journey, on one hand, would come to an end. Rosalina had been watching ever since her husband Christopher disappeared in WarioWare Incorporated. On a deserted road in the middle of nowhere, she met with him, face to face, carrying one of Christopher's inventions with her. A rod. The very same rod Christopher made for her in the first original timeline, only this one was more stable and powerful. And just like back then, she used it to open a time portal, absorbing the corrupted spirits out of the bodies, sending them back through time itself, back to the very same 1988. This time, however, a new timeline was not created. It simply went back in time and started all of the events over again. The spirits were once again haunting Wario's cafe. Wario once again bought a building from an unknown company and started WarioWare. It once again burnt down, and the rest of the events that followed were identical to before. This second timeline was now stuck in a loop, a cycle that seemingly had no end. The timeline repeated itself countless times, and only one single event was eventually able to break it. The events of the second timeline repeated themselves countless times. How many precisely? No one knows. But it did not go on until the end of time. In one of the many cycles, a slight alteration occurred. An alteration that would end this loop once and for all. In the McCroy house, Edward Coleman was once again hiding, only this time the house had pieces of an old music box scattered throughout the various rooms. As Edward was hiding in fear throughout the nights, he picked these pieces up and brought them with him. Not being entirely sure why himself, but he did it. He just had a gut feeling that this music box would be important. On the fifth and final night, he was once again transported into the depths below Wario's closed factory, and all the pieces of the broken music box were collected. He had tried to assemble and fix it the day before, and as he was down here in the darkness, all he could think about was to play it. Even though it would risk the evil entities finding him, he just felt it was the right thing to do. And to Edward's big surprise, a person came running down towards him. Person trapped inside a Wario mascot costume. It was the restless soul of Bruno Gates, who had wandered around the factory's corridors for years, unable to let go and rest. He came running to the sound of the music box because, somewhere in the depths of his being, the sound of the music box reminded him of someone very dear to him. As he approached Edward, who was stuck in fear, the other corrupted dead ones entered the very same room. For the first time since the killings occurred in the factory, Wario and the rest were standing face to face with the killer, the one as they had been searching for years. They did not attack him. They became calm, sharp, focused, intense. Until Bruno Gates let all his grief out in an honest, deep apology.
He did it! He apologised! He apologised for them, for what they did to us. I can feel it. Their forgiveness has brought peace to both him and them. I feel relieved.
This is your last warning! Put your hands above your head now!
I am free.
At that moment, a deep relief and acceptance illuminated deep in all of their souls, and they finally managed to detach from the curse. The spirits of the victims, Wario, Waluigi, Peach, Mario and Luigi, all finally let go and reached a higher realm, and their dead bodies finally collapsed onto the ground for the final time. The curse was also lifted from Ashley and Yoshi and Toad. The curse seemed to have been broken at last. Peace was returned to the city, and Edward Coleman escaped Wario's fast food factory. All this chaos seemed to be over at last. But as it turned out, this was only the first act. The first main step in a deeper master plan, carefully planned out by someone or something sinister behind the scenes. Did the curse just vanish into thin air after detaching from the souls of our heroes? No, it did not. It was very much alive and stronger than ever. Instead, this dark energy latched itself onto Bruno Gates' spirits like an animal jumping on its prey. And Bruno's soul was starting to get pulled downwards, beyond the floor, beyond the dirt, beyond the earth itself. Bruno got dragged into the realm where this demonic curse originated from. Let's back up a bit. There was a reason no one had bought this piece of land before Wario did. There's a reason Thomas Taylor felt a strong pressure as he walked through the factory cellar. There's a reason why the curse teleported Edward Coleman to this exact location. Wario's factory is the access point, the thinnest layer between the two worlds. Everything that had happened until now was a plot, a plan, where all of it played out the way it was meant to. Only a man as full of greed as Wario would buy the land that no one dared to buy before him. Only a man as full of greed as him would curse his friends for money. Why did the cycle happen over and over again, only for the music box pieces to appear in the very last loop? It was Wario, or rather, the curse on him, that did it. Through countless cycles and countless killings, the curse in them had grown so much stronger than it was originally. Strong enough, in fact, to pursue the next step of the secret master plan that was at work. By letting itself be sent through a loop by Rosalina, it grew stronger and stronger with each loop. And by placing out the music box pieces and having Edward Coleman bring them with him, they then took him to Wario's factory. The curse knew Wario's factory was the quickest and easiest pathway between the two worlds. And it knew Bruno Gate was still in the factory, and that he, Bruno, was the key to break this attachment to the souls. As Bruno apologized, the souls found peace. Everything seemed to be over for a moment. But now, this evil energy that had been feeding off the spirits of Wario and the rest for countless years and countless cycles of years were free and stronger than ever. And the next step in the master plan was to take Bruno Gate's spirits with them to the realm below creation. This could only be done now, and not before. The curse had to grow strong enough for the task, and Bruno's spirit was a strong one, explaining why it could even remain in his body after death. Bruno Gate, who thought he finally had found peace, was dragged down, pulled into another dimension altogether. He was always the main target, not Wario. Wario and the others were just a bridge to grow stronger. But why did a curse need to drag a human soul down to this mysterious unknown realm? And why did it need a strong spirit like Bruno's? We will learn more about that a bit later. So you may be wondering, how can a curse know something? Is it sentient, intelligent? Well, remember when the curse was first released? How one of the purple lights, the purple smoke puffs, released from the book was bigger than the others. What was that? It's time to dig deeper and see what's hiding underneath creation itself.